guys, welcome back to the next episode of the TRA Performance Education Podcast with me, your Tiny Titan host, Vicky Mirceta. And today I am very excited. I have got an excellent guest in the hot seat today talking about some boxing science and various other bits surrounding that. And that is Alan Ruddock. Good morning, Alan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not so bad at all. Thank you. You know, enjoying this sunny weather that we've got a little bit of a spell of. Can't complain, really, can we?
It was lovely last week. Managed to get out on the bike a few times and a bit of running. So, yeah, it's very, very nice.
Oh, very good. I don't run personally. I do get on a bike every now and again when I take my kids out for a bike ride, but I don't run. I can't run. I don't think a lot of women can run, to be perfect.
How do you take the kids on the bike?
They have their own bike, and then I just cycle behind them. And then more often than less, we've got the dog attached to my handlebars as well, and then he just kind of pulls me along, which is all very well and good. So
I've got two little ones, and like the little one sits in front of me on my bike, so they're the seats in front of me, and then Lachlan is actually faster running, so he doesn't want to ride his bike. So he's like, why would I ride my bike if I'm faster running than riding the bike? So
well, why not? I suppose, you know, good for him. Hey, if you can run and you can sprint and do all of that, good on you. I know that I can't. I can't even run for the bus, to be perfectly honest. But there you are. It's a good job I drive. Anyway, we digress. So, Alan, for people who don't know who you are, can you just give us a little bit of a background about you so we have an idea of what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Dr Alan Ruddock. I'm a physiologist or sport physiologist at Sheffield Hallam University and boxing science too. So as a physiologist, it's my job to take a look into people's bodies really with lots of the equipment that we've got at the universities, the lactate analyzers, gas analyzers, some devices that we can look into the muscle by shining light into it. Heart rate monitors, all the kind of gadgets and gizmos you might expect to see in the physiology lab. So I try and get an insight into where athletes are strong physiologically and where they might need a little bit of improvement. And, we try and pick out what type of athlete we're working with, whether it's someone who's more of an explosive, high intensity athlete or whether we've got more of an endurance athlete. And we get quite different athletes in boxing science. That there might be boxers, but they look slightly different, which is good for us to identify what type of athlete they are at the very start point. And then off the back of that, I then create training programs to try and make strengths into super strengths and improve those areas of weakness and build them up into strengths. So that's my job really, and I'm looking to see how the body responds to exercise in initial training session or as a response to a bit of testing, and then also try and see how the body adapts as well. So I try and figure out, what adaptation we're trying to induce with a particular type of training and how that might influence performance. And so we can then describe and explain what we're doing. So that's my job. Day to day, I spend most of my time in the labs, either collecting data, testing athletes, working with athletes, in terms of performing, training sessions. Other times I might be lecturing. Other times I might be writing research papers, around anything from my PhD, so thermal regulation work, to things related to boxing, or we've written papers on nutritional guidelines for tennis. We've done other things that we're looking at as a microvascular function at the skin to look at how healthy people are and whether we can, put any dietary interventions in place there. There might be some stuff on beetroot juice thrown in there. So I have about 20 or so research publications in various different aspects. So it's very varied. Day to day, I could be working with a world champion boxer, and then an hour later, I could be working with a prostate cancer patient who's elderly, who might be 85 years old, and so I get kind of across the continuum those whose challenge it is to win Olympic medals, and win world championships, and then I get those whose challenge it is just to survive every day. And just carry out basic tasks, so we get the full plethora and a real breadth of different individuals through through the labs here.
That's amazing. So you're not very busy at all then?
Not really with all that going on and 2 kids as well, and training and everything that goes on. I have to optimize my day somewhat.
Absolutely, haven't you? You've got to schedule everything like the minute. I suppose, yeah, you're a bit like me, really, because I'm certainly not as busy as yourself, as I say, but for people who say, I don't have time to exercise and all they do is a 9-to-5 job, God, listen to this guy. he's got everything going on. But I suppose in relation to having all of those things going on, and because you're so diverse in everything that you do, it's got to be really rewarding, hasn't it? To just help somebody get that Olympic gold medal, but then to actually help somebody survive as well. That's got to be really rewarding for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Winning the helping athletes win world championships, traveling, internationally with them and helping do that is absolutely great, because it means a lot to everyone, and it means a lot to, the fans as well of the athlete. But sometimes when you speak to the older population and just how much that a 12-week training intervention, 3 times a week, an hour a week, with a bit of exercise, it turns around their life. It's just amazing. Every time I ask them, so have you enjoyed the training program? I've absolutely loved it. It's been brilliant. It's one of the best things I've ever done. And this is coming from 80-year-old people who have done and seen everything. So, it's also really rewarding when you hear those things, because it's had a real impact on someone's life.
For sure. Absolutely. I can really empathize and relate to that. I'm a surgical nurse as well myself in my professional background. And the times that I was recovering a patient when we had their colostomy reversed, and they just used to kind of wake up and realize that it's finally gone. It's absolutely, it's heartbreaking, but overwhelming as well at the same time. So I can really empathize with that. And I've got a lot of respect for you for doing that. It's not just about sports performance and how you look. People just want to look good naked. It is actually about life-changing events as well. So perfect work. Anyway, we're going a bit deep, aren't we now? We don't need to go deep in emotions at this time in the morning. Haven't had enough coffee for that.
Okay.
So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the work that you do there. Now, I'm very interested to hear about how you can highlight somebody's strengths and weaknesses based on a few tests. So would you delve into a little bit more about that? If you want to use it for boxing, then great, but maybe things like explosive power output or something, because we can relate that to powerlifters and bodybuilders as well. So how do you test for these strengths and weaknesses, and realistically, what do you test for?
So I'll go to our test battery that we use at Boxing Science. So one of the things that we're really proud of is the test that we use to profile a boxer, whether that's when they first come to work with us, whether that's at the start of a training camp and at the end of a training camp. It will be pretty much similar all the way through. The test battery takes around 2.5 hours to complete, so it's very comprehensive. There are a lot of different tests in there, and each test is in our battery because of a particular reason, where we like to optimize a lot of things and we don't waste a lot of information. We collect a lot of information, we collect a lot of data, and we're very economical with that data. We use it, whether we're using it to compare training sessions and describe what's happening, or whether we're using it to explain performance changes or changing a particular exercise, or trying to pick out a particular adaptation. We're always trying to use that data objectively to try and achieve different goals. So the first test that we do is a standard body composition test. So we've got a segmental body composition analyzer at the university, so we can look at the tissue composition in the right arm, left arm, trunk, right leg, left leg.
Okay.
And one of the key things that we're looking at to start with is trunk mass. Because of the research that we've done, we know that trunk mass, so the amount of muscle or lean tissue around the trunk, is very important contributor to punch force. Okay. So that's one of the things that we look for initially. The other things are, standard things, body fat percentage, things like that. And as we get closer,
and that kind of thing, how much water you have. Okay.
Yeah, and lean tissue distribution between right and left sides as well.
Okay.
And then what we'll do is we'll take that information, especially if there's any imbalances, we'll take that information forward into a bit of a functional movement. I say it's a functional movement screen. We do two things. We do an overhead squat, and we do a single leg squat. And that tells us pretty much everything we need to know about how a boxer moves. So they all move the same. They've all got the same contraindicators to injury. They all look the same, and it's our, and from that information, it's our job then to try and straighten them up, basically,
right,
and get them mobile. We'll do a few little mobility exercises with them, which again tells a few little things about how they move, and then we'll move on to some jump tests. So 2 jump tests. So we'll do a squat jump and a counter movement jump. We use the counter movement jump to give us an indication of explosive force with an eccentric component, and we'll use the squat jump as a concentric only indication of explosive force. And then we'll use the difference between to see how well they can control that eccentric component of a counter movement jump and get an indication of their eccentric utilization. That's important when our boxers are punching, because if they can't control that the eccentric component of punching or a recoil, then that's something that we need to work on. And then we'll move on to our punch specific load velocity profile test. So
that's a mouthful and a half, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, we need to come up with a better name for that. We've got some beautiful names for a lot of our tests, for the concepts. But so we do a landmine punch. So a landmine. So we have I don't know if you're familiar. We have a landmine attachment that we place inside of a disc, and then we just load a 20k bar into the landmine attachment, and then we attach another good word for you, a linear positions transducer.
Oh, right.
Basically, it's a bit of string that turns a wheel, and it tells you how fast the piece of string is moving. How
That's
fast
amazing. That brings a whole new meaning to the world. How long is a piece of string?
Yeah. And when we know how fast the piece of string is moving, because it's attached to the bar, we also know how fast the bar's moving.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. And works in a similar way to a push band.
Okay. Yeah.
So push band uses accelerometry. This is a piece of string. There's probably about 10 times difference in price, with the push being the least expensive. The gym wear is a lot more expensive. Right. So that what we do is we load different weights onto the bar, and then we ask our boxers to throw the bar in a landmine punch style action, and then from that we get an indication of the speed with respect to load, and then from that we can then plot that, and we can run a few statistics through that, and we can work out what type of athlete they are, whether they're very explosive, so whether they're moving the lighter weight quicker than other athletes, or whether they're a more strength-based puncher, whether they're moving the weight at moving the bar at a higher weight faster than other athletes. And we can look at the slopes, we can estimate their hand speed, we can estimate their maximal strength as well, isometric strength as well from that. So that's a pretty unique test that we've got here that no one else does.
Yeah, definitely.
We've been speaking to the guys at the UFC Performance Institute as well, and they're using that test now as well. In fact, the first time they did the test, they actually broke their linear positions transducer because they had it tethered too far away, and the string pulled out too far, and it came off the hub for it, and so they broke it straight away. But so the guys at UFC are using that test. So I think us and the UFC Performance Institute are the other guys that are using that test at the moment.
It makes you very unique. Very unique.
After that, then we come into the physiology lab, so my domain, and we get them on the high-speed treadmill, and we'll do something called a lactate profile, which is coincidentally 3 minutes of running, 1 minute recovery, which is just like boxing. At various speeds, and the metrics that we assess there are things like heart rate, oxygen uptake, energy expenditure, fat utilization, carbohydrate utilization, blood lactate, and it's this test that gives us a really good indication of what type of athlete we're working with. Usually, when we have boxers who start with us on the program, they look like endurance athletes.
Okay.
Boxing's not an endurance sport.
Oh God, no.
It's a high intensity intermittent sport. And so one of the first things that we need to do is try and, with most of the boxers, depending on who we're working with, because each is different, we have to work with them differently. We'll usually try and change their metabolism, and we'll try and change the way they derive energy and how they produce energy to make them a much more effective high intensity athlete.
Now that's really interesting. So how would you actually do that then, to change somebody from realistically an endurance athlete to a high intensity athlete, and swap around their nutritional uptake, I suppose, and how you fix their metabolism to do that? I take it that you're going to do that through nutrition and clever programming. Yeah,
it's more clever program than anything. They're in terms of nutrition, when they're making weight, it's fairly fixed anyway, and they're on lower carbs than you might expect. So they will probably predominantly try and utilize fat as a fuel source, which they have to do anyway if they have to drop body fat.
Absolutely.
And so in strength and conditioning with boxers, we're always fighting against boxing training and the constraints of the sport. So, for example, the boxing stance, they might throw thousands of punches every week in a boxing stance, which is, makes their position, their body position, quite hunched over, externally rotated. And, we don't want them hunched over, we want a nice, thoracic extension, and we want them at least in a neutral position so that we can get the best out of them from a strength and conditioning perspective and try and reduce their likelihood of injury. So always fighting against that. And likewise with their diet, when they have to make weight, we're always trying to fight against that or work around it, put some strategies in place to try and optimize their training as well. So it is more programming, I'd say, than it is nutrition, because we do have those constraints of what they have to do to make weight. But the way that we program it is from the lactate profile, from being on the treadmill, and then from the final test that we do, which is what we call a 30-15 intermittent running test on the treadmill. So they run 30 seconds and then have 15 seconds recovery. The test starts at 8 kilometers per hour, goes up half a kilometer per hour until they can do no more. So they have to wear a harness on the treadmill, because we want them to be able to go to the point where they just cannot turn their legs over anymore. They might be dropping off the end of the treadmill. They might be mid-set, stumbling over, but they've got the harness on so they don't scrape their face against the treadmill belt. And if they do, stumble or trip, then, the treadmill will cut out. But it's a really important test, not only from a programming perspective, because 1, we get their maximal heart rate. 2, if we're doing any high intensity work on the treadmill, we can program off the back of that. And 3, it allows us to see how far they can push themselves. When you get, what I like to do is when the guys are pushing themselves and they've managed to complete the 30-second stage, they then have 15 seconds to try and recover to do the next one. And quite often it's that 15-second period, or rather the first 5-7 seconds of that recovery period, where they make their mind up to continue or not. And you can get a real good insight into how well they can cope with the pain, the breathlessness, and just the psychological strain of running at near maximum. So if you can get in their ear, early and just say, all I want you to do is get back on, just do one more step, and usually you can squeeze some more out of them. And what we found is the test, not only the final speed, but how an athlete responds differentiates between world-class and elite and international standard. Right.
Okay. That's really interesting as well, because it's the same kind of mentality aspect for bodybuilders as well. It's that mentality of going to failure. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you're actually using the same technique of failure, but you're making them fail on a run or a sprint, it's unheard of, obviously, in my particular industry, which is obviously bodybuilding and powerlifting, because we wouldn't be failing on a sprint. We'd be failing as a muscular failure, if you Yeah, you understand what that means. So it's really interesting in that regard. So in terms of utilizing HIIT training, then how would that help with, say, muscle growth? Because obviously you want your boxers to be strong and quick with power as well. So how does HIIT actually benefit that?
So one of the things that sets the upper limit of performance in boxing is your aerobic capacity.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you imagine you've got, you know, two boxers, and let's say they've got different size tanks of energy, the guy with the bigger tank of energy will be able to perform at a higher performance intensity than the smaller guy, and they will have to then step up and try and match those demands. So what we say is aerobic capacity sets the upper limit of performance, and so we then want to try and improve aerobic capacity. And we do that through a number of different ways. And the way we do it principally depends upon how long the camp is and what the game plan is, whether there's a fight strategy, whether that's our athlete's fight strategy or whether it's what we think it's the opponent's fight strategy. So there's a few things that feed into there. But if we think of a standard 12-week camp, we will do a couple of, probably 3 main types of training to prepare them over the 12-week camp. Ideally, we'd have a longer view, you know, more like a 3 to 4 year plan to work on. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes you only have as little as eight weeks. You know, we prepared Kell Brook, who's a welterweight, to step up to middleweight to fight the pound for pound best in the world, Gennady Golovkin, in 8 weeks.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so, you know, it can be done, but it just has to be done cleverly. So the first thing that we would do if we had a boxer new to the program is do sprint interval training.
Yeah.
So if I define sprint interval training as an RPE, rating of perceived exertion, of 10 out of 10 or 20 out of 20, using the Borg 6 to 20 scale, or just anything that's 10 out of 10 effort, just maximum effort, okay, for up to 30 seconds. And then high intensity interval training would be anything that's 90% heart rate max, 90% oxygen uptake, or 9 out of 10 effort for 4 minutes to let's say 10 minutes.
Okay.
That's high. Those are the two different things, and they target different physiological adaptations. So the first thing that we would do with a boxer is have them do something completely different that they have never done before, that they think is just nonsense when you describe it to them. So they will do, the first session that they will do is 4 reps of 30 seconds with 3 to 4 minutes recovery in between, and they will do that on our curved treadmill. So we have a Woodway curved treadmill, so we can do their sprints on there. It's very safe. We've had no injuries on the curve. I don't know how many we've done thousands of training sessions on there. The injury rate is very, very low. So once we've got them used to running on there, then we can then start to implement sprint interval training. So harden as fast as you can for 30 seconds. I did an interview once for the Guardian, I think it was, and we're talking about how much running does a boxer do in the first few weeks of training with you. I said, it's 2 minutes a session. It's like, what? Two minutes a session? Yep, just 2 minutes a session. So yeah, 4 30-second intervals, as hard and as fast as they can. So this has crossover to many different things, including bodybuilding.
Okay.
What we're trying to do with the sprint interval training is to remember that tank that I talked about, is trying to deplete that as quick as possible. That is the major goal of that. So in terms of speed, in terms of distance, we're not looking. They're not our primary outputs that we're looking for. We're looking for 10 out of 10 maximal effort. Try and reduce the cell's energy status as quickly and as much as possible, because we know from that it then starts to signal some adaptive responses, which then helps us with our training improvements and performance improvements off the back of that. It also stimulates a large neuromuscular demand, so we're recruiting those high threshold, fast twitch motor units. And, that is a major shift in what boxers have previously done in their training, where they're just going on 5 mile, nice, steady, slow plods. So you can already see where, that recruitment of high threshold motor units can have transfer then to bodybuilding, because that's important. If you want to improve strength, you want to improve force production, you want to get stronger, you want to lift heavier weights progressively. So you've got those two crossovers there. In terms of how many sessions a week we'd do 3 sessions a week. Can do up to 4. It's a little bit tricky. You've got to manage that fatigue, depending on what other training sessions you've got in the week. And we do that for 3 weeks before we then cycle on to HIIT training.
Wow. Okay. Wow, this is incredible. There's so much information there that you can take and really to maximize performance and overall muscle growth as well. Because I take it that you can look at this from a hypertrophic type of view as well, can't you? By implementing these different strategies. Yeah,
we've got to be careful with hypertrophy, because it's not so important for heavyweights because they don't have a weight category. But all of our, we don't have any heavyweights on the program at the moment, but all of our boxers have the weight category to meet.
Yeah, sure.
So from our perspective as scientists, it would be easier for us to induce hypertrophy to improve force production. That would be the easiest way to do it. But there's only so much hypertrophy we can induce, because then it becomes really hard for them to make weight.
Of course, yeah.
So we've got to really think about it. It's okay in the first few weeks of a camp, or when you work with an athlete for the first time, because it also has beneficial effects on body composition as well, and reducing body fat. So it has benefits in that way. But once they start dropping a little more weight and it gets closer to a fight, we then got to be really careful about their prescription, low prescription, and volume as well, particularly because they're not used to training with such high training loads, and so any little bit of stimulus for hypertrophy is gonna appear on them. Obviously, we want a little bit because we want them strong, but we don't want so much that it's gonna affect their weight and how they make the weight. So what we have to try and do then is look at how quickly they're producing force. So it then becomes a case of, right, okay, we've almost reached the maximum amount of hypertrophy that we've got. How else can we improve force production and improve that forcefulness of the punch? And the way that we do it is to look at bar speeds. So we'll use the linear position transducer again, and we'll try and optimize bar speeds for a particular load and try and maximize rate of force development. So we just recently carried out a little study on how best we can optimize the rate of force development in a trap bar deadlift.
Oh, okay.
A trap bar deadlift for boxers is really useful, because it doesn't, you don't need that much decent technique to do a trap bar deadlift. You can load it up pretty well, so you can get our boxers stronger faster. Basically, that's why we're using it.
Really interesting.
So yeah, in terms of a hypertrophy, it's, we have to be careful, quite careful in doing so. But for bodybuilders, what you get is the fitness adaptations, but for a lot less volume.
Okay.
And so with the reduced volume, what you're not sacrificing there is basically any loss in muscle hypertrophy and any atrophy from the muscle from doing endurance training. You get the same benefit for less time in movements that are high force, similar to what you would want to be achieving in bodybuilding, but without that stimulus for atrophy.
Very good. And that's definitely something that all of us bodybuilders want to know about. So awesome. So Alan, obviously I know that we are coming up on time here, because I know that you're extremely busy as well. And I'd love to have some further conversations with you in relation to reducing atrophy for bodybuilders later on down the line. But for now, obviously, to wrap this up, where can people find out more about your work and follow your work on social media?
So we have the website, which is boxingscience.co.uk. Then our Instagram profiles are, mine is at Dr.Ruddock _boxi, something like that. Search.
I'll find it.
We're on the internet. And then Danny Wilson, who works with me at Boxing Science, is at Wilson _boxing science. And then we've got Twitter. I guess just Google us and you'll find us. We're around on the internet.
Sure thing. So what I'll do is I'll find out all of those links and I'll put them all down here on the comment section in the YouTube video, guys. So if you do have any questions for Alan, then please obviously put them there, and I will hopefully make sure that Alan receives them, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So once again, thank you very much for your time, Alan. I really appreciate it. And guys, I'll speak to you next time on the next episode of the TRA Performance Education Podcast. All right, take care and see you soon.